You? A CEO? Please, you're just a shadow wearing your father's last name. But what they didn't see coming was how that shadow would eclipse them all. Stick around till the end, because silence doesn't mean surrender, and justice delayed is still justice delivered. Claire stepped into the Whitmore Group headquarters with practiced grace, her heels clicking across the marble floor that echoed with the efficiency of a machine too polished to feel human. She nodded curtly to the receptionist, who suddenly looked away. Odd, but not enough to stop her stride. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Claire's breath caught. Her nameplate, polished brass with her full title, Claire Lawson, Chief Operating Officer, was gone from the boardroom door. No note, no replacement. Just a void where her authority used to be. The silence in the hallway was not the ordinary hush of professional courtesy. It felt curated, like the kind that follows a verdict no one wants to read aloud. She pushed open the boardroom door. Her usual seat, center left across from the CEO's chair, was already occupied. Garrett sat there with a half smile, fiddling with a stylus he had no business holding. A presentation glowed behind him, the title reading, Innovation Roadmap, Quarter 2. Her project. Claire, Eleanor said smoothly from the head of the table. I didn't expect you this morning. I wasn't aware I needed an invitation. Claire replied, her voice steady. Her eyes scanned the room, the usual faces, but none met her gaze. Not even Emily, her longtime assistant who sat to the side, rigid as a statue. Eleanor's lips curved, not quite a smile. We've implemented a strategic restructuring, just temporarily. It's important for the company's growth that we explore. Fresh leadership on certain initiatives. Claire crossed her arms. You mean Garrett? Garrett leaned back as if relaxing into a throne. Just holding the reins for a bit, Claire. Nothing permanent. Claire forced herself to breathe. She glanced at Emily, hoping for some flicker of confusion, even quiet outrage. But Emily looked pale and complicit. Her mind flitted to her father's portrait in the main lobby. Gregory Whitmore, founder and titan. He would have demanded loyalty, transparency. But now his legacy stood in an office where truth had become decorative, like the glass awards displayed for innovation stolen. I see, Claire said evenly. Eleanor nodded as though dismissing a child's tantrum before it could begin. We all value your contributions, but you've been carrying quite a lot. We thought a break would serve you well. Claire's jaw tightened. You thought? The room didn't breathe. Garrett gave a little laugh, too loud. We just want what's best for everyone. Everyone but me. She turned sharply, heels cutting the air like punctuation marks. As she neared the elevator, she paused. The feeling in her gut, familiar. The same one she had the day her father died, and a relative she barely knew asked about shares, not grief. She wasn't just being sidelined. She was being erased. She pressed the elevator button with force, willing the polished chrome not to crack under her thumb. From down the hall, she heard Eleanor's voice, low, almost fond. She'll thank us later. The elevator dinged. Claire stepped in and didn't turn around. But her hands were fists now, cold and trembling. And somewhere beneath that, something else stirred. Something sharper. Something patient. It wasn't over. It had barely begun. Claire descended the stairwell that led to the Whitmore Group's private archives, a level most employees didn't even know existed. The scent hit her first. Aged paper, leather bindings, and the stale perfume of silence. Her heels echoed off the concrete floor, each step more hesitant than the last. She hadn't been here since the funeral. At the end of the hallway stood a frosted glass door marked Executive Legacy Records, authorized only. Claire raised her access badge. It blinked red. She tried again. Red. A voice crackled from the intercom beside the door. Ms. Lawson, access to legacy records is temporarily restricted. On whose authority? She asked, her voice sharp. General Counsel Directive. All legacy documentation is under legal review. She stared at the light, unmoving, her badge still pressed against the reader. Then she turned and walked back, her mind burning with questions. The door had always been open to her. Her father made sure of that. Gregory Whitmore had once walked her through the room when she was 15, pointing at a portrait from his early days and saying, "This will be yours someday." He'd said it like a promise etched into the company's foundation. But now it was as if someone had taken an eraser to every line of it. She returned to her own office, what was still technically hers, though she wondered how much longer that would be true. The door was ajar. Sophie, the company's legal counsel, was waiting inside, dressed in her usual gray pantsuit, lips pressed into a line. "I was hoping to catch you," Sophie said, standing as Claire entered. Claire closed the door gently behind her. "Are you the one restricting my access to legacy files?" Sophie sighed. "I'm acting on directives from the acting CEO. Any documents that pertain to the company's structural history or shareholder records are considered sensitive until the upcoming audit." "That office hasn't been touched in years," Claire said, her voice tight. "And now it's suddenly a threat?" "I didn't say threat, just protected." Claire sat slowly, folding her hands on her desk. "You know this isn't what my father wanted." Sophie didn't reply right away. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I know." "Then why are you doing this?" "Because I have a job," Sophie replied softly. "And right now, that job includes upholding what the acting leadership deems legally prudent. I'm sorry, Claire, I don't have the freedom to side with history." Claire's phone buzzed. Lena's name flashed across the screen, her friend and quiet confidant from the IT division. Claire accepted the call on speaker. "Hey," Lena's voice came through, slightly tinny. "I heard you tried to get into the archive room." "I did. They shut me out." "Of course they did. Look, I don't know if this matters now, but a year before your dad passed, he sent me an encrypted file. Through a private channel. It was weird. No instructions. I never opened it because the file type looked custom. Not malware, just unreadable." Claire sat up. "Can you find it?" "I'll try. But if it's password locked, we'll need to think creatively." "Do that," Claire said, pulse quickening. "Anything your father buried is worth digging up." As the call ended, Sophie cleared her throat. "Claire, there's another thing." Claire turned. "There's a family council meeting scheduled for May. I reviewed the guest list." "And? You're not on it." Claire stared, her face blank for a beat too long. "They're holding a council meeting without a Whitmore heir present?" Sophie hesitated. "Be careful. This company may look like it's yours, but it's not." Claire adjusted the neckline of her navy silk dress in the bathroom mirror of the Bellamy Grand Hotel, watching herself with the careful neutrality of a woman rehearsing diplomacy. Outside those marble walls, the Whitmore Group's annual Spring Innovation Gala was in full bloom. Champagne fountains, floral installations, and a string quartet subtly modernized with synth overlays, all engineered to distract. She stepped into the ballroom just as Garrett took the stage, smiling like a game show host. Lights shifted to highlight him, casting soft halos over the guests in tailored tuxedos and pastel gowns. Claire slid through the crowd, unnoticed. It wasn't until she reached the back of the room that she realized Emily was trailing behind, her expression tight with quiet concern. Garrett's voice boomed across the room. "When we envisioned the innovation project, we knew it had to be bold, agile, disruptive, and thanks to the leadership of this incredible team," he gestured vaguely toward the room, "we delivered beyond projections. I couldn't be prouder to stand at the helm of such vision." Applause. Claire didn't blink. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides, but her jaw tensed. "Your vision?" The team hadn't even existed before she built it. Her father had sat beside her at the first sketch meeting. He'd leaned over, nodding at her diagrams, and said, "This will be the cornerstone of your legacy." Now that legacy stood in the spotlight, wearing someone else's name tag. Eleanor stepped forward next, poised in a floor-length silver gown, her signature red lipstick unflinching under the glare. She wrapped an arm around Garrett's and addressed a small group of reporters. "Leadership runs in the family," she said with a wry smile. "You can see where Garrett gets his instincts." More camera flashes. Claire sipped her wine, gaze fixed on nothing. It was a public performance, start to finish. A carefully orchestrated act where the star wore borrowed lines and the playwright watched from the shadows. "Hell of a show," a voice murmured beside her. She turned. Charles Marrow, an old associate of her father's, stood there in a crisp navy suit, a bourbon glass in hand and a half-smile dancing at the edge of his lips. "You came," she said, surprised. "Wouldn't miss it, though I thought I'd be clapping for a different Lawson." Claire looked away. "Apparently I've been rewritten." Charles chuckled. "They're playing a short game. People who inherit power always do. But those who built it?" He met her eyes. "They last." For a moment, the noise of the gala dimmed. Claire saw her father's reflection in Charles's weathered gaze, and the coldness in her chest warmed into something more dangerous. Clarity. "They've underestimated you," he added quietly. "That's their mistake." Emily appeared then, gently touching Claire's elbow. "Press wants a photo of Garrett and Eleanor with the innovation display. They've repositioned the backdrop. Took your name off the credits." Claire nodded once, a precise motion. "Let them take it." But as she turned to watch Garrett soaking in another round of applause, her expression shifted. She didn't blink. Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise but in resolve. They had thrown the first strike in plain sight, assuming she would retreat, smooth things over, fade into irrelevance. They were wrong. They want war, she thought, eyes locked on Garrett. And she was done waiting. ChatGPT jan noi. Claire jung truok he kan kwa, joy kwa kan ho kau kap kwa, meko, chojoy. The silence on the other side was deliberate, like a performance that began before the curtain rose. Finally, one of the sleek mahogany panels creaked open to reveal Garrett, lounging against the frame like he belonged there. "Big sister," he drawled, voice coated in mock warmth. "Mother's expecting you, sort of." She brushed past him without a word, heels echoing on the polished marble floor. The suite was opulent in its restraint. No clutter, no sentiment, just angles and perfection. Eleanor stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed, the city glittering behind her like a kingdom already conquered. Claire didn't waste time. "We need to talk." Eleanor turned slowly. "We are talking. You're here, aren't you? I want my position reinstated." The words came out like steel. Eleanor arched a brow, unfazed. "You were never removed. You were repositioned." "That's spin," Claire shot back. "You took my authority, buried my project, and paraded Garrett like a prodigy." Garrett settled into a leather armchair, swirling a drink he hadn't earned. "You're overreacting," he offered, tone syrupy. "There's room for all of us if you're willing to adapt." Claire ignored him. "I've earned this. You know I have." Eleanor walked to a sideboard and poured herself a neat scotch. She didn't offer Claire one. "Public trust matters, Claire. You're brilliant, but not resonant. People want certainty, not cerebral detachment." "You think Garrett is certainty?" Claire gestured sharply toward him. "He's a mannequin with talking points." Eleanor didn't flinch. "He's digestible, and right now the company needs someone digestible." Claire took a step closer, voice trembling with fury now. "You're rewriting history. You're burying Dad's legacy. My legacy." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Don't romanticize your father. He built an empire, yes. But he also made mistakes. And I won't let sentiment be our undoing. Weakness doesn't belong in legacy, you know that. You were raised on it." Garrett stood, straightening his cuffs. "Look," he said, voice softening in practiced empathy. "We can find you a role that honors your contribution. Something strategic, but lateral." "Like a ceremonial advisor?" Claire spat. A visible name, minimal responsibility. Claire stared at them both, feeling the room constrict like a vice. I'm not a placeholder, she whispered, and I won't play along. Eleanor sipped her drink. You're not a leader, Claire. You're a symbol, a name we can retire. Silence swallowed the room. Garrett's smirk deepened. Claire's vision blurred, not from tears, but from the surge of heat rising behind her eyes. Something fell. She looked down. Her father's pen had slipped from her hand. The Mont Blanc he'd given her the day she'd been named COO. It landed on the marble floor with a sharp click. Claire stared at it, but she didn't reach down. She turned on her heel and walked out, fists clenched so tightly her nails left crescents in her palms. The elevator ride down was silent. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls, unreadable. In the lobby, she passed a newsstand. Her gaze snagged on the front page of a folded business magazine, a glossy photo of Garrett shaking hands with a board member. The headline screamed in bold letters, "The Future of Whitmore." Under the gray drizzle of a March morning, Claire stepped out of her car and looked up at the brass letters etched across the awning. Wells and Lannister, LLP. The building loomed with an old-world authority, a 5-story structure of red brick and greened copper, wedged between glass towers like a relic that refused to vanish. She was buzzed in without question. The receptionist offered no greeting, only gestured toward a door marked Private Consultation, 3A. Claire entered to find a man already waiting behind an enormous mahogany desk. He stood the moment she stepped in. Ms. Lawson, he said, voice firm and dry as parchment. I'm Harold Wells. Thank you for coming. Claire accepted his handshake cautiously. You said this was regarding Margot Ellis? He nodded and gestured for her to sit. I was her attorney for 22 years. Before her passing, she left explicit instructions for me to contact you, and only you, upon a specific condition being met. Claire's brows drew together. What condition? Wells opened a leather portfolio, sliding out a sealed envelope with a wax stamp. Ellis's crest, a stylized E inside a circle. That Eleanor Whitmore would officially seize sole controlling interest of the Whitmore Group. As of last Friday's vote, that condition is fulfilled. Claire hesitated only a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a notarized trust document and a handwritten letter. She skimmed the legal terms, barely breathing. 12% of Whitmore Group voting shares. She murmured. Wells confirmed with a small nod. Legally transferred. Non-revocable. Protected under a dormant clause triggered by Margot's forced removal from the board 12 years ago. Claire blinked. But I thought she sold her stake. She didn't, he said. She buried it. In layers of silent trusts and shelf companies, all waiting for the right moment. And the right recipient. Claire pulled out the second document. A short note, written in thick ink on Margot's signature stationery. To the only Whitmore with conscience and spine. You may not have asked for this, but you'll know what to do. M.E. Claire sat back in her chair, the edges of the paper trembling between her fingers. Her mind swirled. Numbers, implications, alliances. She wasn't just back in the game. She was a threat now. Emily's message buzzed quietly on her phone. Outside if you need me. She turned the screen, hit call, and waited. Lena's face blinked to life, framed by a cluttered study and a steaming mug. So, what's going on? Claire lifted the trust document toward the camera. You're kidding, Lena whispered. I'm not. This is leverage. Real leverage. Legal? Claire nodded. Wells vetted every clause. This trust activates on a conditional trigger Eleanor can't undo. It was designed to bypass her. Lena stared at the screen. Then you've got power. No, Claire said slowly. I've got ignition. Wells cleared his throat. You don't have to act immediately, but Margot hoped you wouldn't hesitate too long. Claire folded the papers carefully, tucking them into her bag as if they were glass. She stood, extending her hand again. Thank you, Mr. Wells. He held her gaze. Be careful, Ms. Lawson. There's a reason this was kept hidden. Outside, the rain had stopped. Claire stepped toward Emily, who was already studying her face. You okay? Emily asked. Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the skyline, eyes steady, voice low. We're not fighting back, she said. Emily turned to her, confused. What? Claire's lips curled ever so slightly. We're taking it all. Claire sat alone at the long marble island in her condo kitchen, a fresh mug of coffee cooling untouched beside her. On the surface, she appeared calm, barefoot, dressed in soft gray knitwear. But her laptop, strewn with open tabs, buzzed with tension. Legal records, corporate filings, archived project memos from the Whitmore Group's intranet, which she still had access to. For now. The hook from Dani Vang Len Ro Rang Trong Hien Thuk Kua Sang Hom Jo. Claire pores over old internal memos and notices subtle edits to her father's original mission statements. The edits weren't egregious, just insidious. The kind of red lines made by someone who knew the power of erasure. Her father's voice, once bold in his wording about familial stewardship, integrity over quarterly gains, and succession with heart, had been slowly diluted across internal documents. Eleanor had kept the shell but scraped out the soul. Claire's eyes narrowed. She flipped back to an old PDF memo titled Vision 2025, last modified 7 years ago. Her father's words glowed in the margins, but a more recent version, labeled Recalibrated Outlook, authored by Garrett, used every corporate buzzword possible while saying absolutely nothing. It was subtle, but it was intentional. She knew that now. Eleanor wasn't just taking control. She was rewriting history to justify it. Callback tingled through her memory. Her father once told her, during a late-night strategy session when she was just 25, if they ever try to hollow out what we built, you'll see it in the paper trails. Patterns never lie. He wasn't wrong. Her phone buzzed. Lena again. Claire answered on speaker. Find anything? I checked the metadata on those encrypted files from Dad. There's something odd. Lena's voice was sharp with alertness. The main folder is empty, but the backup logs? They point to a secondary device, one that was last synced, the day before he died. Claire's stomach dropped. You mean, he was still editing something the night before? Yes, and I think it's stored somewhere not digital, possibly analog. Claire tapped her pen against the counter. Like what? An old safe, a locked drawer, a physical ledger. Whatever it is, it's not in the system. Claire's mind snapped back to her father's old lake house office. He kept a vault there, built into the floor under his desk. She hadn't been back since the funeral. Lena, I might know where it is. The next morning, Claire drove 4 hours out of the city in a rental car, alone. The lake house was exactly as she remembered. Stoic, silent, sunlit through the birch trees. She entered with the old brass key still on her father's ring. Inside, dust covered the mantel and family photos. But the office? Immaculate, as if someone had been cleaning it. Her breath hitched. Someone had been here. And recently. Kneeling down, she peeled back the rug and found the vault. Combination unchanged. 08-15-77. Her parents' anniversary. Inside were 5 folders, neatly bound. One caught her eye. Project Guardian, eyes only. She opened it slowly. It wasn't financials. It was surveillance. Records of Eleanor's private meetings, her vote-blocking strategies, off-record payments to board members, and a list of assets transferred to Garrett through shell firms after her father's passing. Violations of fiduciary protocols that, if made public, could collapse them both. Claire stared at the sheets, heart pounding. She felt sick. Her father had known. He hadn't just suspected betrayal. He had documented it. A memory surfaced. Her father, the week before his heart attack, holding her shoulders tightly and saying, Some truths can't be spoken. They must be shown. She packed the files into her satchel and turned off the lights. As she was about to leave, her phone lit up again. Emily. There's a new development, Emily said, hushed. Garrett just pushed a shareholder meeting. They want to call a vote of no confidence in you as board advisor. Claire didn't flinch. I won't stop them, she said. I'll let them dig the hole. She stepped outside as night fell, and that was when the cliffhanger landed. She opens her father's locked safe and finds a folder labeled Project Guardian, and everything changes. Garrett begins to sense Claire is no longer idle, and tightens surveillance. From the corner of his office overlooking the skyline, Garrett Whitmore stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the data dashboard scrolling across his ultra-wide screen. Activity logs, encrypted traffic, internal server flags. Something was off. She's poking around again, he muttered, narrowing his eyes as a fresh stream of data crawled across the lower pane. The origin? A secured but low-priority IP address, buried inside Claire's old sandbox server, a location she hadn't accessed in nearly a year. He turned to the head of internal IT, a young man named Bryce whose palms were already sweating. Flag everything. I want full packet capture. If she's transferring anything at all, I want a mirror. Copy her credentials if you need to. Bryce hesitated. That could be legally gray. Garrett leaned in. She's using company resources. She's still technically on payroll. You think the board will care about gray? The message was clear. Do it or you're next. Bryce nodded and disappeared. Across the building, Claire sat in a locked server closet on sublevel 3, lit only by the glow of her laptop. The walls were lined with cold racks and cooling fans hummed behind her. Emily crouched beside her, nerves on edge. I'm telling you, if they see me on this subnet, I'll be gone before noon, Emily whispered, her fingers hovering over the touchpad. You're not touching anything, Claire replied calmly. You're just watching. The files are already isolated. I'm just replicating metadata to trigger dormant access keys. Emily chewed her lip. You've done this before. Claire didn't answer. She clicked into a shell interface and entered a sequence her father had once written down in code, disguised as a quote in a retirement speech. Each character pulsed, then faded. A new window blinked to life. Project Guardian, Directory Index. Bingo. 5 years they've kept this hidden, she whispered, scrolling through subfolders labeled Contingency A and Memoranda Override. One folder titled Board Loyalty Map caught her eye. A knock echoed from down the hall. Not on their door, but close. Emily froze. Claire closed the screen, dimmed the monitor, and whispered, The second drawer, now. Emily opened a server bay and climbed in as Claire shoved her laptop beneath the bottom panel. Just as she stood up and smoothed her skirt, the door creaked open. It was Bryce. Oh, sorry, he said, clearly startled to find someone already inside. Tech issue on level 6 said it was originating here? Claire smiled faintly. Already fixed. It was just an old routing loop. You can close the ticket. Bryce's eyes flicked around the room, but he didn't press. Right, got it. He left. Claire waited a full minute before exhaling. Emily climbed out, brushing lint from her pants. What was that? A warning, Claire said, checking her watch. We need to go dark for 48 hours. Back in Garrett's office, Bryce reported the encounter. She was already there, said it was just a loopback issue. Garrett didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the screen. A new flag had gone off. She's good, he said softly. Too good to be quiet for no reason. He reached for his phone and tapped into the building's internal surveillance system. Watch her. Every floor, every terminal, and get someone on Emily. Elsewhere, Claire and Emily walked the long corridor back toward the elevators. Claire's thoughts were racing. Eleanor hadn't just buried her father's ideas. She'd buried entire frameworks of protection he'd left in place, the kind of legal mines Claire could now detonate. And yet, Garrett had sniffed something. He was reacting, not relaxing. Claire turned to Emily as they waited for the elevator. If we're not careful, they'll shut us out before we can use anything. What do we do? Emily whispered. Claire's jaw clenched. I can't just outmaneuver them, I need to expose them. They stepped inside the elevator. Floor buttons lit up. But just as the doors began to close, Claire's phone buzzed. A notification, but not from any known contact. No name, just one line of text. You have allies. Don't waste time. Lena finally opens the encrypted file her father sent her before his death. Rain tapped against the windows of Lena's tiny apartment, the rhythm steady and unrelenting. Claire sat cross-legged on the worn couch, eyes locked on the flickering screen of Lena's old laptop. Emily crouched beside them, a small toolkit of flash drives and cables strewn across the coffee table. The light in the room came only from the dim floor lamp and the soft blue glow of the monitor. Lena hesitated with her finger over the enter key. I don't know why I never opened it, she murmured. Part of me was scared. Like, if it really was from him and it said something I couldn't undo. You're doing this now, Claire said gently. That's what matters. Lena nodded and pressed the key. The file opened with a pause, then a flicker. A grainy video feed emerged, time-stamped 18 months before Jonathan Whitmore's death. The camera was static, positioned in what looked like his home study. Books lined the background, and a single lamp cast his familiar profile in warm light. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. If you're watching this, it means I didn't finish what I started. Claire leaned forward, breath tight in her chest. I've made mistakes. Most of them I let Eleanor clean up. That was my bargain, my silence for her efficiency. But Claire, she's not part of that deal. He paused, eyes shifting as if weighing a decision. Eleanor's ambition will consume everything. That includes our daughter. So I left a few pieces out of reach. The screen went black for a moment. Then a directory appeared. PDF scans, notarized forms, and one folder titled Guardian Override. Lena opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, dated 4 years prior, signed by Margot Ellis and Jonathan together. It confirmed a silent transfer of Margot's Whitmore shares to an unlisted trust, one that would activate only under 2 conditions: Eleanor assuming majority executive power and Claire being removed from any C-suite position. It was a fail-safe, Claire murmured. He built in a tripwire. Emily clicked into the next document. It was a vote proxy, Jonathan's personal vote, assigned not to Eleanor, but to the trust holding the Margot shares. The last file was a scanned will, never officially filed, containing a codicil handwritten in ink. Claire reached for the mouse, her hands shaking slightly. The codicil read, in the event that Claire is dismissed from leadership by any mechanism not voted on by the full board, she shall be entitled to invoke Directorial Override Clause 17C. This clause permits her to call an emergency shareholder review and initiate a vote of confidence. Binding and final. The words stared back at them like a lifeline. It's not just about the shares, Emily said softly. It's a procedural weapon. Claire sat back, stunned. Her father hadn't just left her sentiment. He'd left her tools. Proof. Legal firepower buried under layers of encryption and silence. Lena looked over. We'll have to verify the filing status. If that codicil was never entered officially? Claire nodded. Then we force the board to recognize intent. We make this public. A sharp knock echoed from the hallway. They froze. Emily peered through the peephole and exhaled. It's just a food delivery. No name. Lena grabbed the bag and shut the door quickly, locking it twice. Claire stared at the screen. Every document, every line. It was her father speaking across time, trying to shield her from the very downfall she was living now. She turned to Lena, eyes firm, voice low and certain. This is no longer about me. It's about making his voice count. Eleanor strikes first. She leaks a story framing Claire as mentally unfit for leadership. The alert came not from an assistant or a board member, but from Emily's pale face, illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. Claire watched her friend's lips part slowly, as if reading something she couldn't yet comprehend. "You need to see this," Emily murmured, turning the screen around. The headline blared in bold. "Whitmore heiress faces mental health crisis. Concerns rise over corporate stability." Claire's chest tightened. Below the headline, a blurred photo of her from last year's retreat, eyes closed, hand on her forehead, was framed as if she were mid-breakdown. The article cited anonymous sources, hinted at erratic decision-making, and included select quotes from therapy sessions Claire had attended years ago. Sessions she'd thought were private, buried behind NDAs and professional boundaries. "This is calculated," she said, voice cold. "They even pulled archived footage of you pacing outside the courthouse after your father's funeral," Emily said, scrolling furiously. "It's disgusting." Claire stood up, walked toward the window. Below, the city shimmered in the gray light of morning drizzle. "They're painting me as unstable so no one questions what they did to me." "Who leaked the therapy records?" Emily asked, her voice shaking with rage. Claire already knew. Only Eleanor would dare dig through the skeletons of her own daughter's grief and repackage it for public spectacle. And only Eleanor had the network to pull it off overnight. By noon, the backlash had begun. Claire's scheduled interview with Bloom and Stone was quietly postponed. One of the primary sponsors for her foundation withdrew their commitment pending clarification. Social media platforms buzzed with speculation, some defending her, others diving eagerly into the narrative Eleanor had fed them. Charles Marrow showed up uninvited. He stormed into Claire's apartment like a man who'd watched a house he built catch fire. "This is war, Claire," he said without preamble. "You need to respond. Deny, countersue, post your own damn video, anything." Claire didn't look at him. She was seated on the floor, back against the wall, laptop open in her lap, untouched. Her eyes were fixed on a photo on the wall. Her and her father, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke. "I don't fight on their terms," she said quietly. "You'll lose control of the narrative," Charles warned. "I never had control of it. That was the illusion." He paced, muttering something under his breath, then finally sat across from her, frustration in every breath. "Do you have a plan?" Claire's fingers hovered over the laptop keys. "I recorded something. It's not ready. But when it is, it'll be the last word." Outside, the clouds had thickened. Thunder rolled distantly, as if the world was echoing her unrest. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Claire stood up slowly, shoulders stiff from tension. Emily went to answer, but Claire raised a hand. "Let me." She opened the door to a courier dressed in the standard Navy uniform. The woman offered a respectful nod and handed over a thick, sealed envelope. "For Ms. Claire Whitmore. Direct delivery, no copies." Claire took it, eyes narrowing. The return address read, Margot Ellis Estate. Final. As she closed the door, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the heavy shift of momentum. The past wasn't done speaking. The envelope contains Margot's handwritten letter to Claire, meant to be opened if all else fails. The paper was thick, old-fashioned. Claire unfolded it slowly, the scent of aged ink and lavender rising from its creases. Margot Ellis's handwriting was sharp, almost masculine in its precision. No loops, no flourishes, only intention. "If you're reading this, then Eleanor has crossed the line I always feared she would." Claire read the words out loud in a whisper. The apartment bathed in a pool of golden light from a single lamp. Emily sat cross-legged across from her, eyes wide but silent. "I fought to stay on the board, not for me, but to protect the founder's vision. Your father trusted me to guard that line, Claire. But I was forced out before I could name my successor. So I found another way." The letter went on to detail meetings Margot had held in secret. 3 other original stakeholders, Mr. Caldwell, Ms. Reeve, and Henry Otis, had each pledged to assign Margot their vote proxy, under one condition. If Whitmore Group ever betrayed its founding principle of ethical leadership, Margot had quietly transferred those rights into a private trust, to Claire. Claire's fingers trembled as she reached into the envelope again. Inside was a secondary folder, smaller but heavier. It contained documents from the firm Margot had used, sealed legal proxy assignments, notarized, dated, and verified. One by one, Claire flipped through them, and the numbers added up like weight pressed into her bones. 12% from Margot, 5.5% from the proxies, 17.5. She didn't need to wait for Emily's reaction. The expression on her friend's face mirrored the electricity pulsing through her own veins. Claire exhaled shakily, then pulled out her phone. Charles answered on the second ring. His voice was scratchy, as if he'd fallen asleep with a cigar between his teeth. "Please tell me this is the call I've been waiting for." "It's time," Claire said. There was a pause. Then, "How much?" 17.5. Charles let out a whistle. "That crosses the threshold. You can call an emergency vote to challenge executive structure. Hell, you can override Eleanor's chair position if you frame it under governance misalignment." "I want to do this clean," Claire said. "By the book. Nothing they can refute." Charles chuckled. "Claire, this is the book. You're quoting sections she never thought you'd read." Emily was already pulling up the board communication software on her laptop. The company's internal system required verified shareholder weight for meeting proposals. Claire handed her the notarized documents one by one. With every scan, the digital counter ticked up. "This will trigger alerts," Emily warned. "I want it to," Claire replied. The boardroom invitation template opened. Claire sat forward, adjusted a few words, and typed the subject line herself. "Motion for realignment. Shareholder session. Mandatory attendance." She paused before clicking send. Her fingers brushed against the edge of Margot's letter again. "Send it," she said finally. "Let's end this in their court." Emily's finger hovered just above the enter key. "You sure they'll show up?" she asked. Claire's voice was steady. "They'll come. Power doesn't ignore its mirror." Claire walks into the boardroom she was once banned from, this time by legal right. May 3rd dawned like a held breath. The sun spilled through the mirrored windows of Whitmore Group HQ, painting gold lines across the lobby's marble floor. But Claire didn't pause to admire the light. Her heels clicked steadily as she walked toward the executive level, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The security guard stood aside without a word. The glass double doors to the boardroom loomed ahead, doors she hadn't seen from the inside since her nameplate was removed without warning. Now, her name was back, etched temporarily onto a placard that rested on the long conference table. Claire Whitmore, shareholder authority, 17.5%. Inside, the air was tense and curated. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Garrett lounged to her left, arrogance practically steaming from his pressed cuffs. The remaining board members, a mixture of loyalists, fence-sitters, and old guard allies, murmured low greetings as Claire entered. She said nothing at first. She simply walked to her seat, placed a leather folder before her, and opened it slowly. Charles leaned in beside her, whispering, "The floor is yours. Clause 9.3 allows you to call it now." Claire stood. "I'm invoking Clause 9.3 of the Whitmore Governance Charter," she said clearly. A motion of no confidence in the acting chairwoman, Eleanor Whitmore. A collective breath held. Eleanor's fingers steepled beneath her chin. "And on what grounds?" Claire's eyes swept the room. "On grounds of unilateral restructuring without board approval, conflict of interest in appointing a direct family member to a project leadership role, misuse of internal HR protocols, and public defamation of an executive partner." She clicked the remote. A screen lit up behind her, displaying internal emails, headlines from the media hit piece, and the restructuring plan that stripped her of authority, none of it filed with full board review. "You're framing inconvenience as illegality," Garrett scoffed. "It won't hold." Claire didn't even look at him. "I now hold 17.5% of controlling shares, including proxies designated in trust by Margot Ellis and 3 founding shareholders. That's enough to force a special vote." Gasps rippled around the table. Eleanor's mask flickered. "This is a stunt," she said icily. "And I invoke Clause 11.2, emergency override. As acting chairwoman, I demand a delay pending legal review." Claire didn't flinch. She simply placed another set of documents on the table, sliding them toward the chairman. Margot Ellis's override documents supersede Clause 11.2. The emergency powers only apply if no overriding trust has been activated. Margot's trust was verified. The moment I was removed from leadership without a board vote, her safeguards took effect. The chairman, a man who had once toasted Eleanor at her birthday, adjusted his glasses and began to read. For 30 seconds, the room was silent, but for the soft turning of pages. Then he looked up. "The documents are in order. The vote proceeds." Eleanor stood. "This is absurd." "The meeting," the chairman interrupted, his voice firmer than expected, "is now under Claire Whitmore's authority." Eleanor tries to regain footing, but her carefully spun image begins to crack. The boardroom, once a chamber of quiet power, had become a stage under floodlights. 2 cameras, installed at Claire's request, live-streamed the special session to Whitmore Group's key stakeholders and legal observers across 3 continents. No more whisper deals, no more closed doors. Eleanor adjusted her blazer and offered a tight smile to the nearest lens. "This spectacle," she began, "is regrettable. But I understand emotions run high when legacy is questioned." Claire didn't blink. She waited. Sophie, the company's legal counsel, entered from the hallway, files clutched tightly to her chest. Her usual poise had frayed. Strands of hair escaped her bun, and the shadows under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and mounting pressure. She sat at the far end, meeting neither Eleanor's gaze nor Claire's. "Sophie," Claire said gently, "I'm invoking transparency protocol. Please confirm who authorized the release of my private medical data to the press last month." The silence lingered long enough for Garrett to lean back smugly, clearly expecting another non-answer. But Sophie spoke. "The authorization came from Eleanor Whitmore's office, signed by her executive assistant on direct verbal instruction. I was told it was legal risk management, but I now understand the real intent." Gasps, this time not subtle, spread around the room. Eleanor's mask twitched. "Sophie, I don't," Sophie said quietly. "Not this time." Claire stepped forward. "And while we're on truth, this email was sent from Garrett's secure terminal 3 weeks ago. Read aloud, please, Charles." Charles took the paper Claire handed him and cleared his throat. "To James L. and Audrey K. I believe we can find common ground. If you vote against Claire's motion, I'll ensure preferred stock bonuses in Q3. Let's keep this clean and quiet." "Forgery," Garrett barked. "Except it's been verified by 3 forensic analysts. Your digital signature wasn't even encrypted. You were sloppy." Claire's voice was steady, sharp. "And I didn't come here with allegations. I came with evidence." The screens flickered, then played a grainy video. It was old, likely taken from a home camcorder in her father's study. He sat in his favorite leather chair, glasses low on his nose, fingers steepled. "If you're seeing this," he began, voice tired but warm, "I've passed, and the board's been compromised. Claire, you're the only one I trust to guard what we built. I've rewritten the succession clause. Don't let them push you out. Not again." Claire didn't look away, even as the lump in her throat threatened to steal her breath. She let the silence sit after the video ended, let it press against every wall of the room. Eleanor, face pale, stood abruptly. "He was weak. He always was. Legacy is not sentiment, it's survival. I did what needed to be done." And just like that, her control snapped. No speech could repair that sentence. No PR firm could undo it. The chairman adjusted his seat, scanned the room, and turned toward the camera. Effective immediately, Eleanor Whitmore is stripped of her executive authority. Garrett storms out, but cameras catch his final tantrum. The double doors slammed open, and Garrett exploded into the hallway with 2 camera crews struggling to keep up. Sweat clung to his collar, and the once pristine knot of his tie now hung askew. "This company," he barked to the reporters, was built by people who understood power. Not emotions, not nostalgia. What you're seeing in there is a hostile takeover in pearls. He didn't realize the feed was already live. Claire watched from the monitor in the adjacent press room, unmoved. Emily sat beside her, muted mic in hand, staring with wide eyes as Garrett's tantrum went viral in real time. His voice cracked somewhere between the word legacy and entitled, and the Chiron on the news channel read simply, Whitmore heir unravels Lev. He just handed us our next 3 press cycles, Emily whispered. Outside, reporters swarmed. Inside, the cleanup began. HR launched an ethics probe that same afternoon. Garrett's name was stripped from office signage before he'd even cleared out his desk. Screensavers across Whitmore HQ quietly updated. His innovation project folder archived. His digital profile suspended. Meanwhile, in a corner conference room on the 38th floor, Eleanor sat silent. Her attorney spoke on her behalf, offering terms, a private exit, preservation of benefits, and a non-disparagement clause. Claire read the document once, twice, then slid it back across the table. I won't gag the truth, she said. If she walks away, she does it in the daylight. The lawyer blinked. You're declining a mutual NDA? Claire nodded. Let them see everything. It was a dangerous move, and she knew it. The safer play would have been to clean house quietly, lock the doors, scrub the stains. But Whitmore had operated under silence for too long, and she had learned the cost of letting things slide beneath the marble. Later that evening, a national news anchor replayed Garrett's meltdown, intercut with footage from the board session. Side-by-side images, Garrett screaming, Claire seated with hands clasped and eyes steady, flooded the airwaves. Headlines shifted tone. Heir implodes, successor steps up. Claire Whitmore, the quiet storm. Claire didn't smile, even as approval numbers climbed. She simply returned to the executive floor and walked past the now unoccupied office that once belonged to her mother. In a freshly painted corner room, a team from HR met to finalize the ethics inquiry. Emily passed Claire a summary packet. It's not pretty, she said, but it's honest. Claire flipped through pages of witness statements, email transcripts, and timelines of policy abuse. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reform. And yet, as the noise died down, a new silence settled. Not the silence of erasure, but of anticipation. She sat at her father's old desk for the first time since he died. The view hadn't changed, but she had. Across the glass, her reflection stared back. Not the discarded daughter or the underestimated figurehead, but someone else entirely. Charles entered quietly and closed the door behind him. You did it, he said. No, Claire corrected. I started it. He raised an eyebrow. Now they see you. But who are you going to be next? With power reclaimed, Claire begins mending what was broken. The door to her father's study no longer resisted. It creaked open with a gentle sigh, as if relieved the right person had returned. Claire stepped inside slowly. Dust still lined the shelves, and the scent of cedar and aged paper clung to the air like memory itself. The morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting pale stripes across the carpet. It had been 3 years since anyone touched this room. Sealed after his funeral, left in stasis by a mother who had wanted to move on, and a daughter who hadn't yet known how to return. Now she was here. Not as an intruder, not as a daughter looking for permission, but as the woman who carried the name and all that came with it. On the desk lay the untouched journal, a fountain pen resting diagonally across the leather cover. Claire opened it, thumbing past pages of neat cursive until she reached the final entry. Claire never shouts. She never pushes. But she anchors a room with her silence. If they can't see it yet, they will. She pressed a hand to the page, not crying, not smiling, just breathing, letting the truth land gently. By noon, she was back in the boardroom, but this time not to fight. She drafted a new memo. To all department heads, effective immediately, all ethics complaints during Eleanor Whitmore's term will be reviewed by third-party counsel. Then another, to HR. Initiate reinstatement offers for employees whose positions were dissolved under personal conflict. But it wasn't just about policy. Claire wrote personal letters, handwritten, not typed, to every department where fallout had lingered, to the assistant in R&D whose promotion was blocked for speaking up, to the logistics manager pushed into early retirement, to the junior exec Eleanor publicly humiliated and privately ignored. Each letter was different, each sincere. At dinner that evening, Claire met Lena and Emily at a small, quiet restaurant Lena used to frequent in college. The walls were covered in photographs, mismatched frames, and menus that hadn't changed in 20 years. Lena laughed, her hand wrapped around a chipped mug. "So what's next, Madam CEO?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "You tell me. I want you on the junior advisory board." Lena choked. "What?" "I'm not offering it as a favor," Claire said. "You've earned it. You stayed loyal when it would have been easier not to. I need someone who'll call me out when I start sounding like them." Emily toasted her glass. "To conscience. And spine." Laughter followed. Light, real, unforced. Later that night, Claire returned home and sat in the silence of her living room, still in her suit, heels kicked off by the door. She lit the candle her father had always kept on his desk, a strange habit for a man so controlled. The scent filled the room, vetiver and something warm, like home. She didn't break down because she was lost or hurt. She broke down because, for the first time, she wasn't. She cried not from the scars left behind, but from the strange peace that followed survival. And just as the tears dried, her phone buzzed. A headline lit up the screen. Claire Whitmore to be honored at Founders Legacy Summit. The day of the summit. Claire prepares for her first public speech as CEO. Backstage was quiet, no tech chatter, no scripted cheerleaders, just silence, broken only by the distant hum of the auditorium beyond the velvet curtain. Claire stood alone, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. Shoulders squared, eyes steady, lips untouched by makeup, but curled in a quiet resolve. The speech was folded neatly in her hand, though she already knew every word. For the first time, her voice would not need to compete with others in the room. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the silence settle. Then a light tap sounded at the doorframe. Emily peeked in, smiling. "They're ready for you, CEO." Claire didn't respond immediately. She let the word land, echo. Not COO, not daughter of the founder, not interim, not symbolic, not inherited. CEO. She stepped into the corridor, heels clicking against polished floor, past framed portraits of past honorees whose eyes seemed to follow her with a mixture of judgment and awe. As she approached the curtain, the MC's voice boomed through the loudspeaker. "And now we welcome the recipient of this year's Legacy Reformation Award, Claire Whitmore." Applause thundered. The curtain drew back. Claire walked onto the stage, not flanked, not announced by another. Just her. She paused at the podium, letting the ovation die down on its own, not shushing it, not reveling in it, simply standing with it, letting it be. "3 months ago," she began, "I sat in a room built by my father and was told, without words, that I no longer belonged, that I was a name to be retired, a placeholder in a legacy I didn't deserve." A hush fell. No one moved. I didn't respond with noise. I responded with evidence, with facts, with quiet. And with every step since, I've learned that legacy isn't something handed down. It's something rebuilt, deliberately, painfully, and with both eyes open. She paused. "My father taught me that transparency is not weakness, that truth can survive even when its voice trembles, that leading doesn't mean being the loudest, but being the one still standing when the noise fades." There were no teleprompters, no bullet points, just her voice. "And yes," she continued, glancing toward the press section, "I am my father's daughter. But I am no man's shadow." The crowd rose to its feet before she even left the podium. Afterward, backstage flooded with handshakes and camera flashes. Business leaders, old allies, former critics, some sincere, others opportunistic. Claire moved through it all like a weathered tree in the wind, centered, unmoved. Charles approached with Lena in tow, both beaming. Claire hugged them both quickly, tightly. Emily handed her a small envelope as they slipped into the waiting car outside the venue. "Your desk missed you," she said with a wry smile. Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet with a logo she hadn't seen in years, Ellis Tech. Emily nodded. "They're offering a merger, full parity on board seats, early stage talks, but serious." Claire leaned back into the leather seat, the skyline unfolding before her. She folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and tucked it back in the envelope. "Let them wait," she said. Justice didn't arrive with a bang, but with the quiet force of truth reclaiming its seat. Claire's silence had once been mistaken for weakness, yet it became her sharpest weapon. In a world where power often masks corruption, her battle proved that integrity may bend, but it doesn't break. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment 1 if you connected with Claire's journey, or 2 if you feel there's still something left unresolved.